Thank you to Phil for that welcome. What a venue this is to actually be meeting in. Isn't it great to have this new place and to see so many of you here? I don't know. Do you ever watch The Apprentice with Lord Alan Sugar? Yeah. All these aspiring young executives and would-be entrepreneurs are all out there to try and impress, the great man, aren't they? They're all trying to outdo one another. And of course, Lord Sugar sits there, doesn't he, sort of in stern judgment. And one by one, they fail, and you get that point of the finger, don't you? And he says, well, what does he say? You're fired. Yeah, and off they go, sort of tail between legs, until there's just one candidate left who's successful, and of course, then is invited to join, Lord Sugar's enterprise. Years ago, I used to work for a company, and we used to supply components to Alan Sugar, as he was then, for his Amstrad computers. If you remember the Amstrad computer, we supplied the microchips that powered that computer. And inevitably, we would get Alan Sugar on the phone every week. Managing director of his company, but he's personally there, and he's berating us because we haven't met this week's order in full, or we haven't met it on time, and some poor guy in the office is there like this, And Lord Sugar's, telling him, I don't know why I deal with this Mickey Mouse organizer. And of course, we had to take it because he was paying us. But I wonder, what are the qualities, if you want to call them qualities, that Alan Sugar is looking for in those candidates? You can speak back to me. Ideas. Energy. Passion. Ideas. Perfection. I think brains. Yeah. Appearance. Yeah. They've got to look the part. And I think he's probably, to be honest, he's probably looking for something a bit more ruthless than that as well. I think he's looking for the one that will stand out and is prepared to outdo the others, because that's what he wants in business. And I guess the real quality that he's looking for is somebody that's going to make money, because it's a business after all, and that's what he's wanting for his enterprises. People that are going to make money for his company. So yeah. And those are, in many ways, the sort of values that this world tells us that you've got to have, particularly if you're a young person. If you're going to get on in this world, you've got to be the one that's going to push yourself ahead and outdo the others, and really, be focused on the objective. I can't help contrasting that, with the qualities that Jesus looked for in his apprentices. Because if you look at that group that Jesus called to follow him and to work with him, I'm not sure any of them would have really got through an interview panel. And especially you look at Simon Peter. Peter is the one that Jesus has chosen, and he's going to go on and lead the church. That's the role for Peter. And yet you look at Peter, and he's so impetuous. He says the first thing that comes into his head. He always seems to mess things up. It's said of Simon Peter, isn't it, that he had this gift of opening his mouth and putting his foot in it. And yet that's who Jesus chose. And that's typical of the disciples, the followers, that Jesus chose to follow him. And if you go back right to that first encounter that Simon Peter and the other disciples that were with him had with Jesus, that very first encounter, that first meeting, and Jesus had used their fishing boat to talk to the crowds that gathered round the Sea of Galilee, so he could be heard. And then he turns to Peter and he says, right, let's go do some fishing. And Peter says, look, we've been out all night. We haven't caught a single thing. And yet, there must have been something, I guess, that was persuasive about Jesus, because they go and they have this amazing catch of fish. It's what Peter did. He was a fisherman. And this is, almost as if Jesus is saying, right, thanks for the use of your boat. I think this will cover the costs of these fish. You can go and sell them at the market. But suddenly something overcomes Peter, and he suddenly realizes that this person that's in that boat with him, that he spent the last few hours with, there's something very special about him. Peter is overcome really by a fear. What does this man, this stranger, want with the likes of me? And Peter says, look, please just go away, just leave us alone, because, I'm just an ordinary bloke, I'm not good enough to mix with the likes of you. And Jesus turns to him and the other fishermen that were with him and says, look, don't be afraid. Come with me and I'll show you how to fish for people, for men and women. And amazingly, they just leave everything, that, the boats, the fish, and they follow him. There must have just been something about Jesus that when they had that encounter, they knew that, you take that moment, or you'll have moved on, and you'll have gone on to the next town or village, and you'll have lost that chance. And they go with him. And they see him do absolutely amazing things. But when I read that story, and, I contrast that with sort of the people that perhaps Lord Sugar is looking for to be his next line of executives and people working for him, and the qualities that Jesus was looking for. And what I think is that Jesus was looking for those people that said, I'm not good enough to be one of your followers. Yeah, I'm not worthy. I'm a sinner, I'm a failure. I cannot do what you want me to do. And I think when people say, I'm not good enough to come to church, because everybody in church we all know everybody in church is absolutely perfect, don't we? Well, that's what it seems like to people outside. That's the impression that people have of church. And yet Jesus is saying, you that don't think you're good enough for my kingdom, you are the ones that I want to come and follow me. They follow him, these fishermen. And this, he hasn't explained what it's going to be about. He hasn't told them how they're going to fish for people. They just follow him. And it's a bit later on that he starts to spell it out. These are the qualities that I'm looking for if you're going to be one of my followers, if you're going to be one of my apprentices. These are what I want, you to model your life on. It's in the Bible. We call them the Beatitudes. Alan will know where we're going with this, because we've We meet in a small group every week, and this is what we've been looking at for the last few weeks. Beatitudes, it's a fancy word, it just means blessings. Yeah. And because they start, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, because, the world belongs to you. And these qualities each one has a reward if you read it through. Those that are mourning will be comforted. Those that are broken in spirit will have the riches of the kingdom of heaven. It turns the values of the world on the head, because the world says that if you're going to get ahead and you want a team of people to establish this new enterprise, this church, you're going to want the best quality, the ones that are confident, the ones that are able to be pushy and achieve things, the high achievers. And yet Jesus picks this group and he says, these are the qualities that I'm looking for. You might be familiar with that passage, perhaps from a traditional translation of the Bible, but I want to share it from a version of the Bible called The Message. And you might want to think how these things apply to you. But when I read them, what I see is a perfect description of Jesus. So how do these apply to me? But how do they apply to Jesus? You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more room for God and his rule. You're blessed when you feel you've lost everything that is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are. No more, no less. That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. His food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat. You're blessed when you care. At that moment of being careful, you find yourselves being cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and heart, put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. And you're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of to compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. And you're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into God's kingdom. Those are the values that Jesus called for if you want to be his follower. But those are the values that he lived out every day through his life. In many ways, they perhaps seem weak, you're being downtrodden, I don't know. The world's going to walk all over you. And yet, within those 8 sayings, there's great power. And I'm reminded that, in the midst of all the troubles in Northern Ireland, obviously things are still going on today, and we heard of a tragic shooting just yesterday, but at the height of those troubles, when the bombs were going off, there was a bomb set off in the town of Enniskillen, and it was Remembrance Sunday, and the crowds were there on the street through the main town. And there was a man there called Gordon Wilson, and he was there with his daughter. And the bomb went off, and they were covered in the rubble. and Gordon's daughter died as he held her hand. Immediately afterwards, Gordon Wilson said, I forgive those people that have done this, and I don't want any retribution. I don't want any fighting back. I want peace. This was in 1987, and I believe that, his strength in that brought about the peace movement in Northern Ireland, the reconciliation between those communities, the stopping of the violence and the tit-for-tat killings. So if you think we read through those Beatitudes and you think that's about being weakness and that's being downtrodden, it isn't. It's about great strength and it's about great courage and it's about following the teachings of Jesus to actually change this world. So I'll leave that thought with you. But more than ever, I just want to say that if you feel that you are not good enough to be a follower of Jesus, that's a qualification that he's looking for. Amen.
Thank you.
We're going to sing, and I'll give a short prayer for us to finish with afterwards.